Have you ever imagined stealing a 150-foot-long commercial jet and just vanishing into thin air? In 2003, something happened on a quiet runway in Angola that stunned the aviation world. A jet vanished without warning or a trace, and somehow no one ever explained how. This is the true story of aviation's most haunting mystery. The aircraft at the center of this mystery was a Boeing 727-223. It was built in 1975 and spent most of its life flying routine passenger routes for American Airlines across the United States. By the early 2000s, it was aging, outdated by newer models, and finally pulled from commercial service. But instead of being scrapped, it was sold. A Miami-based company called Aerospace Sales and Leasing bought the retired jet. They didn't plan to restore it for luxury or display. It was stripped, gutted, and converted for a new purpose. The passenger seats were removed, and the interior was reinforced for cargo. It was now a flying fuel truck intended to deliver diesel to mining operations in remote areas of Africa. In 2002, the plane arrived at 4 de Fevereiro International Airport in Luanda, Angola. From there, it was supposed to fly fuel to hard-to-reach zones in the region. But that never really happened. By early 2003, the aircraft had been sitting on the tarmac for months. Flight activity had stopped. Airport officials were growing frustrated, and reports pointed to unpaid airport fees, inconsistent maintenance, and disputes with local authorities. So the operations slowed, then stalled entirely. And yet, the plane wasn't abandoned, not even close. It sat in plain view at a functioning, heavily used international airport, the kind of place with security patrols, air traffic control, and daily departures. Ground crews saw it every day. It was parked in plain sight. That's what makes this story so bizarre. This wasn't an old wreck hidden in the jungle. This was an aircraft parked in the open at a major airport, under everyone's nose, and somehow it disappeared. There was no flight clearance, transponder, or emergency call. So how did that even happen? How did a huge jet vanish without anyone seeing? Maybe it didn't vanish on its own, but someone made sure it did. Because when investigators retraced what happened that evening, one detail stood out. 2 men had boarded the plane just before it disappeared. They weren't strangers, but neither man was supposed to fly it. The first was Ben Charles Padilla, an American aircraft mechanic and flight engineer from Florida. Ben had worked globally on aging planes like this, often fixing and managing aircraft in hard-to-reach places. In Luanda, he was hired to oversee the 727's maintenance and to deal with airport officials about clearance issues and unpaid debts. By most accounts, he was knowledgeable, respected, and deeply familiar with the plane. But here's the twist. Ben wasn't even licensed to fly a Boeing 727. He was trained, had experience, but not enough to legally or safely pilot that aircraft alone. And a 727 isn't a simple machine. It typically requires a crew of 3, pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer, to operate it safely. At best, Ben could assist in cockpit systems, but he wasn't cleared to take off alone. The second man was John Mutantu, a Congolese national. His role was far more unclear, as he was described only as a helper or ground worker. He didn't know about flight credentials. He wasn't a pilot. Some say he barely spoke English. But for reasons still unclear, he was seen near the plane on the evening of the disappearance. And on May 25th, 2003, just before sunset, both men were spotted climbing into the aircraft. The ground crew hadn't been alerted, and nothing about their presence seemed officially scheduled. At first, no one thought much of it. After all, the jet hadn't flown in months. But minutes later, something changed. The aircraft's engines fired up. The lights stayed off. It began moving, slowly at first, toward the runway. Air traffic control was caught off guard. They tried to make contact, but no response. The plane ignored every protocol. With no transponder, clearance, and communication, it accelerated and lifted off into the Angolan sky. That was the last confirmed sighting of the aircraft. It never arrived anywhere. It never filed a landing report. It simply vanished. And neither Padilla nor Mutantu were ever seen again. So was this a planned escape? A hijacking? A deal gone wrong? Or were they just pawns in something far more dangerous? These questions quickly moved beyond the airport in Luanda. Within hours of the disappearance, U.S. intelligence agencies were notified. A Boeing 727 had taken off without authorization and vanished over the Atlantic. It was an unusual case, and it came at a tense time. This was 2003, just 2 years after the September 11th attacks. Aviation security across the world was still on high alert. The idea of a stolen commercial aircraft raised immediate concerns, not just about where it had gone, but about what it might be used for. The FBI, CIA, and NSA, everyone got involved to find the plane. Investigations began quickly, and the U.S. surveillance satellites were redirected toward West and Central Africa. Intelligence teams reviewed satellite imagery, tracked unofficial landing strips, and contacted authorities in nearby countries. But progress was slow. In Luanda, airport records were incomplete. Some logs were missing entirely. Even the staff reports didn't match up, and officials gave inconsistent timelines. There was no record of who ordered the aircraft to be fueled or how it rolled to the runway unnoticed. As investigators pushed deeper, several possible motives began to take shape. One of the first fears was terrorism. Could the plane be used for an attack? Because the size and range of a Boeing 727 made that a serious concern. But no extremist group ever claimed responsibility. There were no messages, threats, or evidence of any organization being behind the theft. Another theory focused on insurance fraud. The company that owned the aircraft, Aerospace Sales and Leasing, had been under financial pressure. Some wondered if the plane had been taken to erase debts or stage a false loss for insurance purposes. But that theory had problems too. There was no record of a successful payout, or even a clear attempt to file an insurance claim. And using an international airport as the site for a disappearance would have brought a lot of unnecessary attention. However, there was another possibility of criminal smuggling. In the early 2000s, some parts of Africa barely tracked planes back then. It wasn't unheard of for aircraft to be used in illegal trades, transporting drugs, weapons, or unregistered goods across borders. A plane like the 727 could be repainted, given fake documents, and used in areas where few questions would be asked. Still, not even a single credible lead ever confirmed the aircraft's whereabouts. There was no matching tail number, and no record confirmed landing anywhere. The personal story behind the incident only added to the confusion. On the other hand, Ben Padilla's family believed he was not part of any plot. They said he may have been forced to fly the aircraft or misled into participating. Padilla had years of experience as a flight engineer and mechanic, but he wasn't licensed to fly a 727, and a plane that size usually requires a crew of at least 2 or 3 people to operate safely. If he was in the cockpit that evening, then he likely wasn't alone. But to this day, no one else has been identified. After months of international searching and years of speculation, the investigation went nowhere. The tail number N844AA was eventually removed from the FAA registry, but there was no final report, no trace of the plane, and no conclusive explanation. A full-sized commercial aircraft had disappeared and left behind almost nothing. But here's the question. When do theories stop being enough? How long can investigators circle the same possibilities before they start to wonder if something even stranger is going on? Despite the months of digging, surveillance, and pressure from global agencies, no single answer ever seemed to fit. The core facts remained stubbornly unchanged. A Boeing 727 vanished into the night with no trace, verified destination, and no confirmed motive. It was a case that invited endless speculation, but never resolution. Then, new reports started to surface. Days after the disappearance, locals in Guinea, nearly 1,800 miles from Luanda, reported hearing a low-flying jet pass overhead late at night near a makeshift airstrip deep in the jungle. Some even claimed they saw a large aircraft land and then vanish into the forest, possibly being hidden or dismantled. But by the time investigators arrived, it was already too late. Whatever had happened, the environment had already erased it. The jungle was thick, and too much time had passed to confirm anything. Still, the rumors didn't stop there. In the years that followed, satellite teams and aviation watchdogs attempted to track down matching 727s across West and Central Africa. They scanned known smuggling routes, unregulated airports, and aircraft records in countries like Mali, Nigeria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. They looked for tail numbers that had been painted over, aircraft that had been re-registered under different owners, or signs of unusually fast repaint jobs. A few planes raised suspicion and were even grounded for inspection, but in every case, the trail went cold. The aircraft either had proper documentation or had no physical similarities with N844AA. Another theory suggested the jet crashed over the Atlantic shortly after takeoff, perhaps from pilot error, mechanical failure, or fuel shortage. It would explain the sudden radar loss and silence. But again, there was no evidence. And for a crash that close to shore, something should have turned up eventually. Eventually, even the official agencies began to step back. The FAA quietly deregistered tail number N844AA years later, marking the aircraft as officially removed from service. There was never a final report. Angola remained silent, and the U.S. government offered no explanation. It was as if the plane had been slowly erased on paper and in memory. Today, the stolen 727 is often referred to as one of aviation's greatest unsolved disappearances. It didn't vanish in wartime. It wasn't lost over the open ocean. It disappeared from a working airport in a modern city with technology, security, and global communication all in place. It's been over 2 decades since that Boeing 727 lifted off from Luanda and vanished without a trace. For investigators The case became an unsolvable mystery, too strange to ignore, but too incomplete to ever fully close. The intelligence agencies chased every clue, but in the end, it led to silence. And for the families of Ben Padilla and John Mutantu, that silence became unbearable. In a world of constant tracking and surveillance, where every movement is logged and every signal leaves a trace, it seems almost impossible for a 200,000-pound airplane to simply disappear. And yet it did. What makes it more unsettling is that, after all these years, no one seems to know what really happened. Some believe it may have crashed. Others suspect a cover-up that went too deep to expose. And then there are those who wonder if the aircraft is still out there, somewhere, flying under a new identity, hidden in plain sight. Even now, the case remains one of aviation's greatest and most baffling mysteries. So if every possible scenario has been explored, and none of them explain the truth, what exactly happened to Flight N844AA? Maybe we'll never know. But the fact that no one can answer, not with certainty, might be the most unsettling part of all. Because this wasn't just a missing plane. It was a piece of history that simply disappeared. So, what do you think really happened to the stolen 727? Was it a crash, a cover-up, or something still flying under the radar? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you love a good mystery, check out our video on Schultz's hidden treasure, an unbelievable legend that might be true.